I got to get used to this new name too. The Daily Word Bible Study. All right. So that's kind of my new name. It used to be do the Bible verse by verse, but the Daily Word Bible Study. Okay, so we're in First Chronicles chapter 12 and going through the life of David. Now we're kind of getting just a setup of his administration, his kingdom, some of the people. Not a genealogy as labeled, but yeah, we're getting a kind of an extended list. Again, let me just say, apologizing for a lot of these names that, trust me, it's these Hebrew names that I cannot pronounce. All right, but anyway, let's get in it. First Chronicles chapter 12, and verse 1 says, the following were the men who came to David at Ziklag while he was still banned from the presence of Saul, son of Kish. These were among the warriors who helped him in battle. They were archers who could use either the right or left, both to sling stones and shoot arrows from a bow. They were Saul's relatives from Benjamin. The chief author was Anhadar. And again, I'm just going to I'm not going to spare you my butchering of some of these names here. But if you scroll down, look at some of the verse 8. Some Gadites defected David at his stronghold in the desert. They were fighting men trained for battle, expert with shield and spears. Their faces were like the face of lion, and they were as sorts of gazelles on the mountains. Remember, one guy even ran. They used to just run for miles, and sometimes they're just, at speed, a running speed. But it was amazing, some of these guys here. It goes on to list some of the other men. Skip down to verse 15. It says, these are the men who crossed the Jordan in the first month, when it overflowed its banks, and put to flight all those in the valley to the east and to the west of the Benjamite, and men from Judah also went to David in the stronghold. David went out to meet them and said to them, if you have come in peace to help me, my heart would be united with you, but if you have come to betray me to the enemies, even though my hands have done no wrong, may the God of our ancestors look on it and judge. And the Spirit took control of Amasaiah, chief of 30, and said, we are yours, David. We are with you, son of Jesse. Peace to you, and peace to him who helps you. For your God helps you. So David received them and made them leaders of his troops. I would also say God was with David during this time as a transfer time. Keep it in mind that this is a transfer time, a transition time, I should say, from Saul to David. So that's why I was a little skeptical in terms of who can he trust. But you also see God working in the hearts of people, bringing them to David. Verse 19, some Massonites defected David, who went with the Philistines to fight against Saul. However, they did not help the Philistines, because the Philistines' rulers sent David away after the decision. They said it would be our heads if he defect to his master Saul. Now, if you remember when David was on the run, and towards the end, he went and lived in the land of the Philistines, and actually even sort of joined their army. And this was a very kind of interesting thing with David, because, first of all, he was going to be king. Can you imagine the scandal, like even now that he's in his kingdom, that he would have fought against his own people, even though Saul was an enemy? That is why I believe that if we go back and you read in 1 Samuel, that kind of God gave David something to do. And you remember where he was staying, his wife and his children got conquered and captured and taken away. And that kind of diverted David's attention. But as you can see right here, he was actually lining up to fight against Israel. And the Philistines had enough sense to go, what the heck is this? David's going to be their king. David is one of their chief officers. How are you going to have this guy fight with us? Now, in their minds, they're thinking that he would have eventually joined forces, rallied against them in favor to maybe gain favor with Saul. But either way, it was like just a bad idea. Verse 20. When David went to Ziklag, some men from Manasseh defected to him. Adnah, Josabad, Jodiah, Michael, Josabad, Ahilud, and Zilladai, chiefs of thousands in Manasseh. They helped David against the raiders. They were all brave warriors and commanders in the army. At that time, men came day after day to help David until there was a great army like the army of God. So the numbers of the armed troops that came to David at Hebron to turn Saul's kingdom over to him, according to the Lord's word, were as followed: from the Judahites, 600 to 800 men, armed troops bearing shields and spears; from the Simeonites, 70 to 100 brave warriors ready for war; from the Levites, 4,600, in addition to Jehoiada, leader of the house of Aaron, with 3,700 men; and Zodok, a young brave warrior, with 22 commanders from his own ancestral home. From the Benjamites, the relatives of Saul, 3,000. Up to that time, the majority of the Benjamites maintained their allegiance to the house of Saul. From the Ephraimites, 20,800 brave warriors who were famous men in the ancestral house. From the half tribe of Manasseh, 18,000 designated by name to come and make David king. From the Issacharites, who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs with all the relatives under the commanders. Verse 33, from Zebulun, 50,000 who could serve in the army, trained for battle with all kinds of weapons of war, with one purpose: to help David. From Naphtali, 1,000 commanders, accompanied by 37,000 men with shields and spears. From the Danites, 28,600 trained for battle. From Asher, 40,000 who could serve in the army, trained for battle. Verse 37. From across the Jordan, and the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half a tribe of Manasseh, 120,000 men equipped with all of the military weapons of war. And if you remember back when they came to cross over the Jordan, these two tribes and a half stayed on the other side of the Jordan at the time of the big kind of controversy, because they had built a monument which later became a pagan idol. But at the time, they liked the land and they didn't want to go into the promised land, so Moses agreed. Verse 38. All these warriors lined up in battle formation came to Hebron, fully determined to make David king over all Israel. All the rest of Israel was also of one mind to make David king. They spent 3 days there eating and drinking with David, for their relatives had provided for them. In addition, the neighbors from as far away as Issachar, Zebulun, Naphtali came and brought food on donkeys, camels, mules, and oxen, abundant provisions of flour, fig, cakes, raisins, wine, all, oxen, sheep. Indeed, there was joy in Israel. Everybody liked David. They liked David. He was a good king. He was the person that you would have been. When you think about some of our leaders today, think about leaders around the world. There are the good ones and there are bad ones. You know, we're thinking about now Russia. You know, even the Russians are not liking this guy. In fact, This guy probably more like Saul. But David was a good king. When you think about even our presidents in our nations, in our own country over the history, the good kings, those when people said these were good kings. People like the country kind of rejoiced when they were in rulership. Verse 1, chapter 13, verse 1. David consulted with all his leaders and the commanders of hundreds and the thousands. Now, this is to me kind of a foreshadowing in that this was kind of a, in other words, the problem with this statement here is that he did not consult the Lord. And there was a couple of ways he could have done it. He could have read the actual law, but he didn't consult the Lord, and just understand it. So he consulted the people. Verse 2. And he said to the whole assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if this is from the Lord our God, let us spread out and send a message to the rest of our relatives in all of the district of Israel, including the priests, the Levites in their cities and pasture lands, that they should gather together with us, and let us bring back the ark of our God. For we did not inquire of him in Saul's days. So that's a bad testament of Saul, of course. They didn't see God. Of course, actually during the time of the kings, they didn't really do a lot of things that the law had commanded them to do. And this was a good thing as far as David was concerned. And in other words, his heart was right. The execution is going to be wrong. Verse 4. Since the proposal seemed right to all the people, the whole assembly agreed to do it. So David assembled all Israel from Shihor of Egypt to the entrance of Hamath to bring the ark of God from Kirath Jearim. David and all of Israel went to Bela, that is Kirath Jearim, that belongs to Judah, to take the ark of God from there, which is called by the name of the Lord, who dwells between the cherubims. At Abinadab's house, Abinadab's house, they set the ark of God on a new cart, and Uzzah and Ahio were guiding the cart. Now, in order to understand the problem here, we have to kind of go back and understand why this was wrong. So first and foremost, the priests, the priests were the ones who were commanded to carry on the duties of the temple. Well, at this time there was no temple, but the tabernacle, for all the things of the worship, and specifically they were the ones to handle the ark. So you kind of got to remember that now to kind of understand why this was wrong. Verse 8, David and all of Israel were celebrating with all of their might before God with songs and lyres, harps, tambourines, cymbals, and trumpets. And when they came to Chidon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to hold the ark because the ox had stumbled. Then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and he struck him dead because he had reached out to the ark. So he died there in the presence of God. So this is kind of rash, right? And of course, we're getting the commentary by revelation. If you're actually there, you probably don't know exactly what's going on. You know, boom, the guy just drops dead. Verse 30. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah. So he named the place Outburst against Uzzah, as it is still named today. Now, this is kind of ambiguous in terms of what exactly the anger is. Was he angry at God, or was he angry because he had made a dumb mistake that cost the life of someone? Like I say, it's not exactly clear the anger here. Verse 12 this might kind of clear it up a little bit. But David feared God that day and said, how can I ever bring the ark of God to me? So David did not move the ark of God. David did not move the ark of God home to the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, and the Ark of God remained in Obed-Edom's families in his house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed his family and all that he had. All right, I think I'm going to stop here, and then we'll pick it up with the next study here. Kind of interesting story because especially in the Old Testament times, and we have to kind of keep this in context here too, because it's hard for us to understand the sternness. The Old Testament was very specific in its commands, who does what. So for example, if you kind of go back, remember Aaron's sons died when they offered strange fire. Here we see David, which had the great heart, but the execution was wrong. And that's important to remember. Later on, we're going to see that David is going to want to build the temple, and God's going to tell him no. So, sometimes we can have a heart to do something, and it may not be God's will for our lives. That's why sometimes it's really important, not sometimes, but that's why it is important that we seek out what God's will is for our life. What is God's will? And in this case here, even though David had a good heart, he violated God's word in terms of how they were doing it. Only the priests were to be administering the things of the temple. I mean, it's crystal clear in that. And you go back and you read, for example, the book of Moses, Exodus, Leviticus especially, and Numbers, where specifically the duties of the Levites, the duties of the priests were laid out. So that's, unfortunately, again, this is why sometimes these things happen. But again, that's why it's important, I think, to seek out God's will. Okay, guys, don't forget to like and share this video. Subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section. All comments are welcome. And I will see you in the next study.